Purgatorio, Canto 31. Terrestrial Paradise. Dante's Confession. His immersion in Lethe. Beatrice unveiled.
O thou that art across the sacred stream!
Toward me directing with its point her speech, which even edgewise had seemed sharp to me. Continuing, she began without delay.
Say, if this be true, to such a charge must thy confession be united now.
My strength was so confounded that my voice began to move, and wholly died away, ere by its organs it had been released. A while she bore it. Then,
What thinkest thou?
she said,
Reply, for thy sad memories are not extinguished by the water yet.
Perplexity and fear together mixed extorted such a yes from out my mouth that eyes to hear its utterance were required. Even as a crossbow breaks its cord and bow, whenever with too great attention shot, and with less force the arrow strikes its mark, so 'neath that heavy burden I broke down, and as I poured forth gushing tears and sighs, my voice more slowly through its passage came. Then she,
Across the paths which I desired, and which were leading thee to love the good, beyond which there is nothing one can wish, what trenches didst thou find, or hindering chains, for which thou thus must needs despoil thyself of hope of further progress on thy way? What luring charms or what advantages displayed themselves upon the brows of others, that thou shouldst pay thy passing court to them?
Thereat, when I had heaved a bitter sigh, I scarcely had the voice to make an answer, and painfully my lips gave form to it. Weeping, I said, Things of the present turned with their delusive joy my steps aside, as soon as e'er your face was hid from me.
Hadst thou been silent, or hadst thou denied,
said she,
what thou confessest, no less clear would be thy guilt, since known by such a judge. But when self-accusation of one's sin from one's own cheek breaks forth, in this our court the wheel is turned to blunt the sharpened edge. And yet, that for thy fault thou mayst be now the more ashamed, and that, when thou again shalt hear the sirens, thou mayst stronger be, desist thou now from sowing tears, and hark! So shalt thou hear o'er what a different path my buried body should have moved thy feet. Nature ne'er showed thee, nor did art, such beauty as did the pleasing members which enclosed me, and which are scattered now, dissolved in earth. Hence, if the highest pleasure failed thee thus by reason of my death, what mortal thing should afterward have drawn thee to desire it? At the first arrow of deceitful things, thou surely oughtest to have risen up to follow me, who was no longer such. Thy wings, at least, should not have been weighed down to wait for further blows from some young girl or other vain thing of as brief a use. A young bird waits for 2 blows or for 3, but for the eyes of fully feathered birds a net is spread or arrow shot in vain.
As children who are silent when ashamed, and with their eyes upon the ground keep listening, and conscience-stricken and repentant are, so I remained. And she,
Since thou art grieved because of hearing me, lift up thy beard, and thou from seeing shalt receive more grief.
With less resistance is a sturdy oak uprooted, either by our native wind, or by the wind that blows from Java's land, than I at her behest raised up my chin. And when by beard she asked to see my face, I well perceived the venom in her words. Thereafter, when my face was raised again, I saw that those first creatures were at rest from strewing flowers, and thereupon mine eyes, which were as yet but partially assured, saw Beatrice turned toward the animal which in 2 natures one sole person is. Though 'neath her veil, and cross the stream, it seemed to me that she surpassed her old-time self, more than she did all others when on earth. So pricked me now the nettle of repentance, that of all other things what turned me most unto its love became to me most hostile. Whereat such great contrition gnawed my heart, that overcome I fell, and what I then became she knows who gave me cause for it. Then, when my heart restored my outward strength, I saw the lady I found alone, above me, saying,
Hold on to me! Hold on to me!
Into the stream she had already borne me up to my neck, and dragging me behind her, light as a shuttle o'er its top was moving. When I was near the blessed shore, I heard,
Purge me with hyssop,
said in tones so sweet that far from writing I cannot recall it. The lovely lady, stretching out her arms, embraced my head, and plunged me in the stream so far that I was forced to drink its water. Drawing me thence, she set me, when thus bathed, within the dance ring of the lovely four, and each of them embraced me with her arm.
Nymphs are we here, and in the sky are stars.
Ere Beatrice came down into the world, we were ordained to be her maids.
We'll lead thee to see her eyes.
But for the joyous light, there are the three upon the other side, who more profoundly gaze, will sharpen thine.
Thus singing they began, and thereupon they led me with them to the griffin's breast, where, turning toward us, Beatrice remained. And,
See to it that thou spare not thine eyes,
they said,
before the emeralds we have set thee, whence love of old against thee drew his shafts.
1,000 wishes, hotter far than flames, bound mine eyes fast to those resplendent eyes, which on the griffin set their steady gaze. As in a glass the sun, not otherwise the twofold animal was gleaming in them, at first in one, then in another way. Think, reader, if I wondered when I saw that it was keeping quiet in itself, while in its image it was changing form. While, glad and with amazement filled, my soul was tasting of the food which, while it sates, still causes thirst and hunger for itself. Proving themselves to be of higher rank by reason of their deeds, the other three came dancing to their angel roundelay.
Turn thou,
their song was,
turn thou, Beatrice, thy holy eyes upon thy faithful one,
who hath, to see thee, ta'en so many steps.
Kindly do us the favour to unveil thy mouth to him,
that he may thus perceive the second loveliness which thou dost hide.
O splendour of eternal living light, who 'neath Parnassus's shades e'er grew so pale, or from its cistern e'er so deeply drank, as not to feel bewildered in his mind, should he attempt to paint what thou didst seem, when, symbolized by heaven's own harmonies, thou didst reveal thee in the open air.
End of Purgatorio, Canto 31. Purgatorio, Canto 32. Terrestrial Paradise. Vicissitudes and transformation of the car. The harlot and the giant.
So steadfast were mine eyes, and so intent on gratifying their decennial thirst, that all my other senses were asleep, and both on this side and on that a wall of heedlessness they had. The holy smile so strongly drew them with the olden net, when forcibly my face was toward my left turned by those goddesses, for from their lips I now was hearing a
"Too steadfastly."
Thereat the state of vision which exists in eyes but newly smitten by the sun caused me to be a while deprived of sight. But when my eyes were to the small accustomed, I say the small with reference to the great resplendence whence perforce I turned away, I saw that, on the right, the glorious host had wheeled, and was returning with the sun and with the sevenfold flame in front of it. As to protect itself a troop revolves beneath its shields and wheeleth with its flag, before the whole of it can change direction, even so the heavenly kingdom's soldiery who forward were had wholly passed us by, before its pole had made the chariot turn. Back to the wheel the ladies then returned, and so the griffin drew his blessed burden, that though he moved, no feather of him shook. The lady fair, who through the ford had drawn me, Statius, and I, were following the wheel which made its orbit with the smaller arc. As thus we crossed the lofty wood, unpeopled because of her who trusted to the serpent, a song angelic kept our steps in time. A liberated arrow in 3 flights, perhaps, as great a distance would have gone, as we had moved, when Beatrice alighted.
Adam!
I then heard murmured by them all. They circled then around a tree, despoiled of flowers and other leaves on every branch. Its crowning boughs, spread out in greater width, the higher up they are, would for their height be wondered at by Indians in their woods.
Thou, griffin, happy art, since with thy beak thou tearest not this pleasant-tasting wood, because one's belly writhes in pain therewith.
Thus round the sturdy tree the others cried, whereat the double-natured animal,
Thus is the seed of all just deeds preserved.
Then turning toward the pole which he had drawn, he dragged it forward to the widowed tree, and 'neath it left that part of it tied up. As our plants swell when falls the great light, mixed with that which shines behind the heavenly carp, and as each thereupon renews itself in its own colour, ere the sun yokes up his racing horses 'neath another star, even so, a hue revealing, not as bright as that which roses have, and more than that of violets, that tree renewed itself, whose branches once had been so bare of leaves. I understood not, 'tis not sung on earth, the hymn which thereupon that people sang, nor did I bear to hear the whole song through. If I could picture how the unpitying eyes, on hearing Syrinx's story, sleepy grew, the eyes to which much waking cost so dear, as doth an artist who from models paints, would I describe how I then fell asleep. But let whoever will feign sleeping well. Hence to the point I pass when I awoke, and say a splendour rent my slumber's veil, and then a call,
Arise! What doest thou?
As Peter, John, and James were led to see some of the early blossoms of the apple, which makes the angels eager for its fruit, and causes endless marriage feasts in heaven, and overcome recovered at the word whereby far greater slumbers had been broken. And even as they perceived their company diminished both by Moses and Elias, and all the raiment of their master changed, so I, recovering, near me standing saw that pitying lady who before had been the leader of my steps along the stream. But where is Beatrice? All lost in doubt I said, when she,
Behold her sitting there, beneath the tree's new leaves, upon its roots. Behold the company surrounding her. The rest on high behind the griffin go, with songs of sweeter sound and deeper theme.
I know not if at greater length her words were poured, because now in mine eyes was she, who hindered my attending to aught else. On the bare ground she sat, and all alone, left there to be the guardian of the car, I saw the biformed animal tie up. Circling, the 7 nymphs with their persons formed a hedge for her, those lights held in their hands, which safe from Auster are, and Aquilo.
Here for a while shalt thou a woodman be, then without end with me a citizen of that Rome whereof Christ a Roman is. Hence, for the world's sake, which lives badly, keep thine eyes upon the car, and what thou seest be sure to write when once on earth again.
Thus Beatrice, and I, who now was wholly devoted at the feet of her commands, whither she wished turned both my mind and eyes. Fire ne'er descended with so swift a motion out of dense clouds, when from the highest region the rain is falling, as I now beheld the bird of Jove swoop down upon the tree, and break not only its new budding leaves and blossoms, but its bark. With all his might he smote the chariot next, whereat it reeled, as in a storm a ship, when by the waves to starboard now, and now to larboard driven. And then a she-fox, which from all good food seemed fasting, I perceived, hurling herself against the bottom of the triumph car. But for her ugly sins upbraiding her, my lady put her to such speedy flight as was permitted by her fleshless bones. Thereafter, whence it first had come, I saw the eagle down into the chariot's ark descend, and leave it feathered with his plumes. And such a voice as from a suffering heart comes forth was that which came from heaven, and said,
My little ship, how badly thou art laden!
Between both wheels the earth seemed opened then, and forth from it I saw a dragon come, who upward through the chariot thrust his tail, and like a wasp which draweth back its sting, withdrawing his bad tail, he drew away part of its floor, and keen for more went off. That which remained reclothed itself again, as rich soil doth with grasses, with the plumes, offered perhaps with wise and kind intent. Then one wheel and the other and the pole were covered up so quickly that a mouth is open kept much longer by a sigh. When thus the holy structure was transformed, it put forth heads upon its members, 3 upon its pole, and at each corner 1. The first were horned like oxen, but the 4 had on their foreheads but a single horn. Never had such a monster yet been seen. Sitting thereon, as boldly as a fort is seated on a lofty mountain top, a shameless prostitute appeared before me, with eyebrows that were quick to wander round, and then to see that none should take her from him, I saw a giant standing at her side, At times they kissed each other there, but since she turned her greedy fickle eyes on me, that cruel lover scourged her from her head unto her soles. Then filled with jealousy, and cruel in his wrath, loosing the monster, he dragged it through the wood so far away, that with this last alone he shielded me against the harlot and unnatural beast.
End of Purgatorio, Canto 32. Purgatorio, Canto 33. Terrestrial Paradise. Beatrice's Prophecy. Dante's final purification in the river Eunoe.
Oh God! The heathen folk are come!
Now 3, now 4 alternately, and shedding tears, the ladies a sweet psalmody began. And Beatrice with sighs of sympathy was listening to their words with such a look, that Mary at the cross changed little more. But when the other maids had given way that she might speak, she rose upon her feet, and coloured with the hue of fire, replied,
A little while, and ye shall not behold me. And then again, beloved sisters mine, a little while, and me ye shall behold.
All 7 she thereupon before her placed, and merely by a nod behind her moved me and the lady, and the sage who stayed. She thus was going on, nor do I think her 10th step had been set upon the ground, when with her eyes she forcibly met mine. Then with a tranquil face she said to me,
More quickly come, that, if I speak to thee, for listening to me thou mayst be well placed.
As soon as I was with her as I ought, she said to me,
Why, brother, dost not venture to question me, now that thou comest with me?
As unto those who show excessive reverence when speaking in the presence of their elders, and therefore draw no clear voice to their teeth, to me it happened that with imperfect tones, Madonna, I began, my welfare's needs you know, and that which may be good for it. And she to me,
From fear and bashfulness I wish thee now to extricate thyself, that thou mayst speak no more like one who dreams. Know that the vessel which the serpent broke was and is not. But let whose fault it is, believe God's vengeance fears not human sops. Nor shall the eagle airless for all time remain, who left his feathers on the car, whence monstrous it became, and then a prey. For I see well, and therefore tell it, stars now near, and from all checks and obstacles secure, which for us shall a time obtain, within which a 510 and 5, sent forth by God, shall kill the female thief, and that great giant, who with her is guilty. And my prediction, which is dark, perhaps, as Themis and the Sphinx, persuades thee less, because, as theirs did, it beclouds thy mind. But facts will soon become the Naiades, which shall this difficult enigma solve, without the loss of either sheep or grain. Give heed, and even as uttered by myself, see that thou teach these words of mine to those that live the life which is a race toward death, and bear in mind, when thou art writing them, not to conceal in what state thou hast seen the tree, which twice now hath been here despoiled. Whoever robs or teareth that apart, with blasphemy of deed offendeth God, who for his own use only made it holy. For biting it, in pain and in desire, the first soul longed for him 5,000 years and more, who punished in himself the bite. Thy mind is sleeping, if it deemeth not that for a special cause it soars so high, and at its summit so inverted is. And if the vain thoughts which surround thy mind had not been Elsa water, and their pleasure as to the mulberry a Pyramus, thou, by so many circumstances only, wouldst in the interdict upon the tree see morally God's justice. But since made of stone I see thee in thine understanding, and being petrified, so dark in mind that thou art blinded by my speech's light, I also, if not written, wish that painted, at least, thou bear it in thee, for the reason the pilgrim's staff is carried wreathed in palm.
And I, as sealing wax, which changes not the shape imprinted on it by the seal, so likewise is my brain now stamped by you. But why so far above my mental sight are your desired words now flying up? It loses them the more it strives.
That thou,
she said,
mayst thus appraise the school which thou hast followed, and perceive how able its teaching is to carry out my word, and also see that your ways are removed as far from the divine as ere the heaven which speeds most high is distant from the earth.
Whence her I answered, I do not recall that I have e'er estranged myself from you, nor am I conscious of remorse therefore.
And if thou canst not call it to thy mind,
she answered with a smile,
Remember now that this same day thou hast of Lethe drunk, and if from smoke a fire may be inferred, this thy forgetfulness but clearly proves a fault in thy desire intent elsewhere. Truly my words shall naked be henceforth, as much at least as it shall needful seem to make them clear to thine untutored sight.
Both more refulgent and with slower steps the sun was holding now the noonday circle, which with each point of view moves here and there, when even as he who as a leader goes ahead of people stops, if something new he find upon his path, the ladies 7 stopped at a death-pale shadow's edge, like that which 'neath green leaves and darkling boughs the Alps cast o'er their icy mountain streams. In front of them I seemed to see Euphrates and Tigris from one fountain issue forth, and from each other slowly part as friends. O light and glory of the human race, what stream is this, which from one source unfolds, and then from its own self itself withdraws? In answer to this question I was told,
Pray that Matilda tell thee.
Whereupon, like one who frees himself from blame, replied the lovely lady,
This with other things hath he been told by me, and I am sure that Lethe's water hath not hid it from him.
And Beatrice,
Perhaps a greater care, which oft deprives one's memory of its power, hath made the vision of his mind's eye dark. But Unue behold, which yonder now is flowing forth, conduct him to its bank, and, as thou art wont, revive his lifeless power.
even as a noble soul makes no excuse, but to another's will its own conforms, as soon as e'er by outward signs disclosed. Even so, when she had taken hold of me, the lovely lady moved, and then to Statius said with a lady's manner,
Come with him.
If, reader, I had now more space for writing, I'd sing, at least in part, of that sweet drink, which never would have satisfied my thirst. But inasmuch as filled are all the pages planned warp-like for this second canticle, no further doth art's bridle let me go. From that most holy water I returned made young again, as new trees are in spring, when with new foliage they renew themselves, pure, and disposed to rise up to the stars.
End of Purgatorio, Canto 33. Paradiso, Canto 1. Introduction to the Paradiso. Invocation of Apollo. Ascent through the sphere of fire. The order of the universe.
The glory of him who moveth everything penetrates all the universe, and shines more brightly in one part, and elsewhere less. Within the heaven which most receives his light I was, and saw what he who thence descends neither knows how, nor hath the power to tell. For as it draweth near to its desire, our intellect so deeply sinks therein, that recollection cannot follow it. As much, however, of the holy realm as in my memory I could treasure up, shall now become the subject of my song. O good Apollo, for my final task make me as worthy a vessel of thy power as thou dost ask for thy dear laurel's gift. One of Parnassus's peaks hath hitherto sufficed me, but with both of them I now must start upon the course which still remains. Enter my breast and breathe thou as of old thou didst, when from the scabbard of his limbs thou drewest Marsyas forth. O power divine, if thou but lend thyself to me so much, that I may show the blessed kingdom's shadow which in my mind is stamped, to thy dear tree thou'lt see me come, and crown me with the leaves my theme and thou shall cause me to deserve. So seldom, Father, are there any picked to grace a Caesar's or a poet's triumph, the fault of human wills, and to their shame, that his Paeanian leaf should bring forth joy within the joyous Delphic deity, when for itself it causes one to thirst. A great flame follows from a little spark. Perhaps with better voices after me shall men so pray that Sirrah will reply. For mortal men the lantern of the world rises through diverse passes, but from that which with 3 crosses brings 4 rings together, it issues on a more propitious course, and in conjunction with a kinder star, and more in its own image moulds and seals the mundane wax. A pass almost like this had made it morning there and evening here, and all that hemisphere was white and black the other side, when Beatrice I saw turned toward her left and looking at the sun. No eagle ever gazed at it so keenly, and even as from the first a second ray is wont to come and upward start again, as would a pilgrim longing to return, even so to her act, by mine eyes infused through my imagination, mine conformed, and on the sun I gazed beyond our wont. Much is permitted there which is not here allowed our faculties, thanks to the sight created as the human race's home. Not long did I endure it, nor so briefly as not to see it sparkle all around, as molten iron doth, when out of fire it issues boiling. Day then all at once seemed joined to day, as if the one who can had with another sun adorned the sky. With eyes fixed wholly on the eternal wheels stood Beatrice, and I on her fixed mine, from there above removed. Looking at her, I such became within as Glaucus did on tasting of the herb, which in the sea made him a fellow of the other gods. Transhumanizing could not be expressed by words. Let this case, therefore, him suffice, for whom grace holds experience in reserve. If I, O love that rulest heaven, was only that part of me which thou didst last create, thou know'st that with thy light didst raise me up. When the rotation thou, by being longed for, dost make eternal, drew me to itself by harmonies distributed and tuned by thee, it seemed that so much of the sky was by the sun's flame set on fire, that rain nor river ever made so broad a lake. The newness of the sound and brilliant light kindled in me a wish to know their cause, never with so great keenness felt, when she, who saw me even as I behold myself, opened her mouth to calm my troubled mind, ere I did mine to question, and began.
With false imagining dost thou so dull thyself that thou perceivest not what else thou wouldst perceive if thou hadst thrown it off. Thou art not on earth, as thou dost think thyself, but lightning fleeing from its proper place ne'er ran as thou, that art thereto returning.
If I was by her little smiled-out words of my first doubt relieved, within a new one was I the more ensnared. I therefore said, already sated, I had found repose from great amazement, but I wonder now how I can these light elements transcend. Heaving thereat a pitying sigh, she turned her eyes upon me with the look a mother gives her delirious child, and then began.
All things, whate'er they be, an order have among themselves, and form this order is, which makes the universe resemble God. Therein exalted creatures see the trace of that eternal worth, which is the end for which the mentioned order is created. Within the ordered state whereof I speak, all natures have their place with different lots, as near to their source they are, or less, wherefore toward different ports they wend their way through the vast sea of being, which endowed with instinct granted it to bear it on. This instinct toward the moon impelleth fire, this is the motive force in mortal hearts, this binds together and unites the earth, nor doth this bow impel those creatures only which lack intelligence, but those that have intelligence and love. The providence which ordereth all this, with its own light e'er calms the heaven, inside of which revolves the one that moveth with the greatest speed, and thither now, as to a place ordained, that bowstring's power is bearing us along, which to a glad mark speeds whate'er it shoots. 'Tis true that, as a form is frequently discordant with the intention of an art, because its matter in response is deaf, so likewise from this natural course at times a creature turns away, for power it hath, though thus impelled, to bend aside elsewhere, as one may see fire falling from a cloud, if by false pleasure drawn, that primal impulse turn it aside to earth. If well I judge, no further shouldst thou wonder at thy rising, than at a stream thou dost, which to its foot down from a lofty mountain's top descends. As great a marvel would it be in thee, if, rid of hindrance, thou hadst sat thee down, as rest on earth would in a living flame.
Then toward the sky she turned her face again.
End of Paradiso, Canto 1. Paradiso, Canto 2. The first heaven, the moon, reflected happiness, inconstant spirits who failed to keep their vows.
O ye, who in a little boat embarked, have, fain to listen, followed in the wake of this my ship, which singing ploughs ahead, go back to see your shores again, start not upon the ocean, for if me ye lost, ye might perhaps be left behind astray. The seas I sail were never crossed before. Minerva breathes, Apollo is my guide, and all 9 muses point me out the bears. Ye other few, who early raised your necks for angels' bread, on which one here on earth subsists, but with which none are ever sated, ye may well start your vessel on the deep salt sea, if in the furrow of my ship ye stay, ere smooth again the waves become. Those glorious ones who crossed the seas to Colchis were not so much amazed as ye shall be when Jason turned a ploughman they beheld. The innate and ceaseless thirsting for the realm in God's own image made was bearing us as swiftly as ye see the heavens revolve. On high looked Beatrice, and I on her, and in the time, perhaps, an arrow takes to light and fly, and from the notch be freed, I saw that I had come to where a marvel turned to itself my sight. Hence she, from whom the working of my mind could not be hid, as glad as she was lovely, turned toward me, and said,
Direct thy grateful mind to God, who with the first star hath united us.
Meseemed as if a cloud were covering us, as luminous and dense, as hard and polished, as is a diamond smitten by the sun. Within itself the eternal pearl received us, as water, though unbroken it remain, receives within itself a ray of light. If body I was, nor can one here conceive how one dimension could endure another, which needs must be if body enter body, the more should we be kindled by the wish that essence to behold, wherein is seen how once with God our nature was conjoined. There will be seen what here we hold by faith, not demonstrated, but will self-known be, as is the primal truth which men believe. My lady, I replied, as best I can do I devoutly render thanks to him, who from the mortal world hath severed me. But tell me what this body's dark spots are, which cause the folk down yonder on the earth to tell each other fables about Cain. She smiled a little, then she said,
If mortal's opinion therein errs, where key of sense unlocketh not, surely the shafts of wonder ought not to pierce thee now, for thou perceivest that short are reason's wings when following sense. But tell me what thou thinkest thereof thyself.
And I, what seems to us diverse up here is caused, I think, by bodies thin and dense. And she,
Thou'lt surely see that thy belief is sunk in error, if but well thou heed the arguments thou now oppose to it. The 8th sphere shows you many shining stars, which both in quality and magnitude may be observed to differ in their looks. If only rarity and density caused this, among them all one single virtue would more and less and equally be shared. Virtues that differ needs must be the fruit of formal principles, and these save one would, by thy way of reasoning, be destroyed. Again, if thinness caused the dusky spots which thou dost ask about, this planet would in portions, through its bulk its matter lack, or, as a body what is fat and lean distributes, so would this one alternate its volumes leaves. If true the former were, 'twould in the sun's eclipses be revealed, because the latter's light would then shine through, as when in other thin things introduced. This does not happen, hence the other one must be considered now. And should I chance to quash it, false will thy opinion prove. If, therefore, it be so that this thin part extends not through, a limit there must be, beyond which what is contrary thereto allows it not to pass. The other's ray is, hence, reflected, as colour from a glass returns, which back of it concealeth lead. Thou'lt now say that the ray seems dimmer there than in the other parts it is, because from further back reflected. From this retort experimenting, which is wont to be the fountain of the rivers of your arts, can, if thou ever try it, set thee free. Thou'lt take 3 mirrors, 2 of them removed at equal distance from thee, let the third, placed 'tween them, more remotely meet thine eyes. Then, turning toward them, let a lamp stand so between them as to shine upon all 3, and be reflected on thee from them all. Though the most distant light will not extend so much in quantity, thou'lt see thereby how it must needs with equal brightness shine. And now, as at the stroke of burning rays, what lies beneath the snow is wholly bared of what were previously its cold and colour. Thee, thus remaining in thine intellect, will I inform with such a living light that it will quiver when thou seest it. Within the heaven of peace divine revolves a body, subject to whose influence lies the being of whatever it contains. The next, which hath so many eyes, distributes that being among the different essences, distinguished from it and contained by it. The other spheres, by various differences, dispose to their effects and causes those distinctions which within themselves they have. These organs of the world so go their way, as thou perceivest now, from grade to grade, that from above they take and downward act. Give me good heed, as through this argument I seek the truth thou wishest, that henceforth thou mayest know how to cross the ford alone. The holy circle's influence and motion, as from the blacksmith doth the hammer's art, must from the blessed motors be inspired. And that heaven which so many lights adorn receives its impress from the mind profound which turneth it, and makes thereof a seal. And as the soul which lives within your dust unfolds itself through members which are different, and unto different potencies conformed, so likewise, multiplied among the stars, doth that intelligence unfold its goodness, while on its unity itself revolves. Each different power a different alloy makes, mixed with the precious body which it quickens, and with which it unites, as life in you. Because of that glad nature whence it flows, the mingled virtue through the body shines, as, through a living pupil, joy. From this comes what tween light and light different seems, and not from rarity and density. This is the formal principle which makes, according to its strength, things dark and bright.
End of Paradiso Canto 2. Paradiso Canto 3. The first heaven, the moon, reflected happiness, inconstant spirits who failed to keep their vows.
That sun which erst had warmed my heart with love, by proving and refuting, had revealed to me the pleasing face of lovely truth. And I, in order to confess myself corrected and assured, lifted my head as high as utterance of assent required. But that I might behold it, there appeared a sight which to itself so closely held me, that my confession I remembered not. Even as from polished or transparent glasses, or waters clear and still, but not so deep, that wholly lost to vision is their bed, the features of our faces are returned so faintly, that upon a pallid brow a pearl comes no less faintly to our eyes. Thus saw I many a face that longed to speak. I therefore ran into the fault opposed to that which kindled love tween man and fount. As soon as I became aware of them, supposing they were mirrored images, to find out whose they were, I turned mine eyes, and seeing nothing, back again I turned them straight on into the light of my sweet guide, whose holy eyes were glowing as she smiled.
Be not surprised,
she said,
that I should smile at what is childish in thy present thought, since on the truth it trusts not yet its foot, but, as its wont is, turneth thee in vain. Real substances are these whom thou perceivest, assigned here for a vow not wholly kept. Speak to them, then, and hear them, and believe. For from itself the true light which contents them permits them not to turn their feet away.
And I addressed me to the shade which seemed most eager to converse, and I began, like one confounded by too great desire. O well-created spirit, that in rays of life eternal dost that sweetness taste, which never is untasted, understood, 'twill grateful be to me, if thou content me with thine own name, and thy companion's lot. Hence promptly, and with laughing eyes, she said,
Not otherwise doth our love lock its doors against a just desire, than that love doth who wills that all his court be like himself. A virgin sister was I in the world, and if within itself thy mind look well, my being fairer will not hide me from thee, but thou wilt recognize that I'm Picarda, who placed here with these other blessed ones, am happy in the slowest moving sphere. Our wishes, which are only set on fire by that which is the Holy Spirit's pleasure, rejoice in that our joy was willed by him, and this allotment which appears so low, is therefore given to us, because our vows neglected were, and not completely kept.
Hence I to her, in these your wondrous faces there shines I know not what that is divine, which from your old appearance changes you. Hence in remembering you I was not quick. But what thou now dost tell me helps me so, that I more easily recall thy face. But tell me, ye who here so happy are ye desirous of a higher place, that ye may see more friends, or make you more? First with those other shades she smiled a little, and then replied to me so joyously that she appeared to burn with love's first fire.
Brother, love's virtue sets our will at rest, and makes us wish for only what we have, and doth not make us thirsty for aught else. If higher we desired to be, our wishes would be discordant with the will of him who here discerneth us, which, thou wilt see, can in these circles not occur, if love be necessary to existence here, and if love's nature thou consider well. Nay more, essential to this blessed life it is, that we should be within the will divine, whereby our wills become one will, and so, even as we are from grade to grade throughout this realm, to all the realm is pleasing as to its king, who in his will in-wills us, and his will is our peace, and that the ocean is, whereunto moveth all that it creates, and all that nature makes.
Clear was it then to me that everywhere in heaven is paradise, and yet the grace of good supreme reigns there in many ways. But as it happens that if one food sate, and longing for another still remain, for one we ask, and one decline with thanks, even thus with word and act did I, to learn from her what was the nature of the web, whose shuttle she drew not unto its end.
High worth and perfect life in heaven,
she said,
a lady higher up here, in whose rule the robe and veil are worn, that till death come, both watch and sleep they may beside that spouse, who every vow accepts, which love conforms to that which pleases him. To follow her, when I was but a girl I fled the world, and in her habit clothing me, I promised that I would keep within her order's path. Thereafter men more used to ill than good, out of that pleasant cloister dragged me forth, and God knows what my life was after that. This other splendor also, which reveals itself to thee upon my right, and glows with all the radiance of this sphere of ours, takes to herself what of myself I say. A nun she was, and likewise from her head the shadow of the sacred veils was torn. But when she, too, was brought back to the world against her wishes and against good usage, she never from the heart's veil freed herself. This is the splendor of the great Costanza, who by the second wind of Suabia gave the third and final power birth.
She thus addressed me, and thereat Ave Maria began to sing, and singing disappeared, as through deep water heavy objects do. Mine eyes, which followed after her as far as it was possible, on losing her, back to the mark of greater longing turned, and unto Beatrice reverted wholly. But she so flashed upon me as I gazed, that first my sight endured it not, and this the slower made me in my questioning.
End of Paradiso, Canto 3. Paradiso, Canto 4. The first heaven, the moon, reflected happiness, inconstant spirits who failed to keep their vows.
A free man, 'tween two viands equally attractive and removed, would die of hunger before he carried either to his teeth. Thus would a lamb between the ravenings of two fierce wolves keep fearing each alike. Thus would a dog remain between two does. Hence, by my doubts impelled in equal measure, if I was silent I reproach me not, nor do I praise, since thus it had to be. I held my peace. But my desire was painted upon my face, and far more warmly thus I asked, than had it been by uttered speech. Hence Beatrice did even as Daniel once, when in Nebuchadnezzar he appeased the wrath which had unjustly made him cruel. And,
"Clearly do I see,"
she said,
"how both thy wishes so attract thee, that thy thought is so self-bound that it is not expressed. Thou arguest thus: if my good will endure, why doth the violence of others cause the measure of my merit to be less? Again, it gives thee cause for doubt that souls seem to return unto the stars again, according to the opinion Plato held. These are the questions which upon thy will are thrusting equally. I'll hence deal first with that one which hath most of venom for thee. Of all the seraphs, he whom most in God's himself, or Moses, Samuel, or, I say, whichever John thou choose, or even Mary, have in no other heaven their seats than have those spirits which appeared to thee just now, nor for there being more or fewer years, but all make beautiful the highest sphere, and each in different ways enjoys sweet life, through feeling more and less the eternal breath. They did not here reveal themselves because this special sphere had been allotted them, but to express the lowest heavenly state. Thus must one speak to your intelligence, since only from sense objects can it learn what it thereafter fits for understanding. Because of this, the Scriptures condescend to your capacity, and feet and hands ascribe to God, and yet mean something else. And Holy Church in human form presents Gabriel and Michael to you, and the other, who to Tobias once restored his health. That which Timaeus teaches of the soul is not like that which one up here beholds. For, as he says it, so he seems to mean. He says that each soul to its star returns, because he thinks that it was severed thence when God granted it as form, and yet his doctrine is perhaps of other guise than what his words imply, and may possess a meaning which is not to be despised. In case he mean that to these wheel-like spheres returns their influences praise or blame, his bow may hit perhaps upon a truth. This principle, ill understood, once turned nigh all the world awry, so that, in naming Jove, Mercury, and Mars, it went astray. The other doubt whereby thy mind is stirred, less venom hath, because its harmfulness could not conduct thee elsewhere from my side. That this our justice should appear to be unjust in the eyes of mortals argues faith, and not heretical depravity. But here, because your human understanding can penetrate this truth with ease, I'll now, as thou desirest, render thee content. If violence it be, when he who suffers contributes not to him who uses force, these souls were not excused because of that. For will, unless it willeth, is not quenched, but acts as nature acts in fire, though turned 1,000 times aside by violence. For, whether it be bent or much or little, it yieldeth to the force, and so did these, when able to regain the holy place. For, if their will had been as absolute as that which held Lorenzo on his grate, or that which to his hand made Mutius cruel, it would, as soon as freed, have urged them back along the road o'er which they once were dragged. But wills as firm as that are very rare. And by these words, if thou hast gathered them as it behooved thee to, that doubt is quashed, which often would have troubled thee again. But now athwart thine eyes another pass appears, one such that from it by thyself thou wouldst not issue, but wouldst weary first. I surely have instilled this in thy mind, that spirits who are happy could not lie, since such are always near the primal truth. Yet from Picarda thou mayst next have heard that Constance for the veil retained her love. She therefore seems to contradict me here. Oft hath it appeared, brother, heretofore, that, to escape from danger, one has done, against one's will, what was not right to do, as at his father's hest Alcmaeon did, who impious made himself, his mother killing, in order not to fail in piety. In such a case I'd have thee think that force mingles with will, and that they so behave that sinful actions cannot be excused. Absolute will consenteth not to wrong, but in so far consenteth as it fears, unless it yield, to be more greatly harmed. Hence, when Picarda put the matter thus, she means it of the will that's absolute, and of the other I. Hence both speak true.
Such was the rippling of the holy stream, which issued from the fount whence every truth derives, and such it set both doubts at rest. O thou beloved of the primal lover, O goddess, said I then, whose speech both warms and inundates me so, that more and more it quickens me with life, not deep enough is my love to return thee grace for grace. But let who sees and can provide for this. I well see that our mind is never sated unless it be illumined by the truth, outside of which no truth extends. Therein it rests, as doth a wild beast in its lair, as soon as it attains it, and it can attain it, else would all desires be vain. Hence like a shoot doubt rises at the foot of truth, and this is nature, which from height to height impels us toward the mountain's top. This biddeth me, and this assurance gives me, lady, with reverence to inquire of you about another truth that's dark to me. I wish to know if one can so content you for broken vows by means of other things, that these shall not prove light upon your scales. Then Beatrice looked at me with her eyes filled so divinely with the sparks of love, that, overcome, my vision turned in flight, and I with bowed eyes almost lost myself.
End of Paradiso Canto 4. Paradiso Canto 5. The first heaven, the moon. The second heaven, Mercury. The happiness of beneficent activity. Ambitious spirits.
If in the heat of love I flame on thee beyond the measure which is seen on earth, and vanquish thus the power of thine eyes, wonder thou not thereat, for this proceeds from perfect sight, which, as it sees, directs its feet to penetrate the good perceived. I clearly see that in thine intellect the light eternal is already shining, which, if but seen, always enkindles love, and if aught else seduce the love of men, 'tis nothing but some vestige of that light which there, ill recognized, is shining through. Thou now wouldst know if for an unkept vow one could with other service pay enough 'gainst prosecution to ensure the soul.
'Twas thus that Beatrice began this canto, and even as one who cuts not short his speech, her holy argument continued thus.
The greatest gift which, of his bounty, God bestowed when he created, and the nearest like his own goodness, and the one most prized by him, was the freedom of the will, wherewith all creatures with intelligence, and they alone, both were and are endowed. Now, if from this thou argue, thou'lt perceive a vow's high value, if so made it be, that God gives his consent when thou givest thine. For when this pact is closed 'tween God and man, a sacrifice is made of this great treasure whereof I speak, and made by its own act. What then in comparison can be given? In thinking thou canst use thine offering well, good wouldst thou do with wrongly gotten gain. On the chief question thou art now informed, but since in this thing Holy Church exempts, which seems against the truth I showed to thee, a little longer must thou sit at table, because the solid food which thou hast taken requires for thy digestion further help. Open thy mind to what I now reveal, and fix it therewithin, for having heard without retaining doth knowledge make. In the essence of this sacrifice two things combine, one that whereof the sacrifice is made, the other is the pact itself. This last can never cancelled be, except by being kept, and very definite concerning this is what was said above. The Hebrews, therefore, were alone compelled to make an offering, though their offer might in some events be changed, as thou must know. The other, which thou knowest as its matter, may well be such that there will be no sin, if for some other matter it be changed. But at his own free will let no one shift the burden he has placed upon his back, unless the white and yellow keys are turned, and let him deem all permutations foolish, unless the thing abandoned be contained in that which is assumed, as 4 and 6. Whatever, then, weighs by its worth so much that it can cause all scales to tip, cannot, by any other spending, be made good. Let mortals not act lightly by their vows. Be faithful, and in this thing be not thoughtless, as Jephthah was, when offering up the first who should have said, I wrongly did, then keep his vow, and so do worse. And thou mayst deem as impious that great leader of the Greeks, because of whom Iphigenia mourned for her fair face, and for herself made fools and wise men weep, who heard of such a rite. Ye Christians, be more serious when ye act. Be not like feathers in all winds, nor think that any water will avail to cleanse you. Ye have the testaments, both old and new, to guide you, and the shepherd of the church. Let this for your salvation be enough. If evil greed should teach you otherwise, be men, and not like undiscerning sheep, that in your midst no Jew may laugh at you, nor do as doth a little lamb, that leaves its mother's milk, and like a wanton fool against itself for its own pleasure fights.
Thus Beatrice to me, even as I write. Then full of eagerness she turned in that direction where the world is most alive. Her silence and her change of countenance silence imposed upon my eager mind, which had ahead of it new questions now. Then, as an arrow doth, which strikes the mark before the bowstring is at rest, even so did we speed on into the second realm. So joyous did I see my lady there, as into that heaven's light she entered, that, because of it, the planet brighter grew. And if the star was changed and smiled, what then did I become, who by my very nature in all ways am susceptible of change? As in a fish-pond which is still and clear, the fish draw near to that which from without so cometh that they take it for their food, I thus saw far more than 1,000 splendours approaching us, and there was heard in each,
Lo, here is one who shall increase our loves.
And as each one came up to me, the shade was seen replete with joy within the bright effulgence issuing from its midst. Think, reader, if what here is entered on should not proceed, how full of pain would be thy craving to know more, and by thyself thou'lt see how great was my desire to hear from these about the state of their existence, as soon as to mine eyes they were revealed.
O well-born spirit, to whom grace permits to see the thrones of heaven's eternal triumph ere thy life militant be left behind, we by the light throughout all heaven diffused are kindled. Hence wouldst thou inform thyself respecting us, be sated at thy will.
Thus was it said to me by one of those kind spirits, and by Beatrice.
Speak, speak, with freedom, and, as thou wouldst gods, believe.
I clearly see how thou in thine own light dost nest thyself, and from thine own eyes dost flash it, they beam so radiantly when thou dost smile. But who thou art I know not, nor why thou, deserving soul, hast that sphere's grade which veils itself from mortals with another's rays. Thus I, when I had turned me toward the light which had addressed me first, far brighter then it made itself than it had been before, as doth the sun, which by exceeding splendour itself conceals itself, whene'er its heat has gnawed away the tempering of dense mists. So by increase of joy that holy form in its own radiance hid itself from me, and wholly thus wrapped up, in such a way replied to me, as sings the following song.
End of Paradiso Canto 5. Paradiso Canto 6. The second heaven, Mercury. The happiness of beneficent activity, ambitious spirits.
When Constantine had turned the eagle back, counter the course of heaven its flight pursued, behind the ancient who Lavinia wedded, 100 years and more, the bird of God on Europe's verge abode, hard by the mountains whence it issued first, and 'neath the shadow of its sacred plumes it governed there the world from hand to hand, and, changing thus, reached mine. Caesar I was, and am Justinian, he who by the will of that first love which now I feel, withdrew the useless and excessive from the laws. And I, before attending to this work, believed that Christ one only nature had, not more, and was with such a faith content. But blessed Agapetus, who was then the highest shepherd, set me by his words upon the pathway of the genuine faith. Him I believed, and what was in his faith I now see clearly, even as thou dost see, that contradictions are both false and true. As soon as with the church I moved my feet, God, of his grace, with that great task was pleased to inspire me, and thereto I gave me wholly. War to my Belisarius I entrusted, to whom heaven's right hand was so well conjoined, it seemed a sign that from it I should rest. Here then, to thy first question ends my answer. Its nature, though, constrains me to go on with something more, that thou mayst see how rightly against the holy standard moves both who appropriates and who opposes it. See what great virtue caused it to deserve respect, for from that moment it began, when Pallas died to give it sovereignty. Thou knowest that in Alba it sojourned 300 years and more, till finally 3 against 3 fought for its sake again. Thou knowest too what from the Sabines wrong, through 7 kings, till Lucretia's grief, it did, conquering the neighbouring peoples all around. Thou knowest what it did 'gainst Brennus born, and Pyrrhus, and against the other kings and self-ruled states, by Rome's elect, whereby Torquatus, Quinctius for his unkempt locks surnamed, the Decii and Fabii, acquired the fame which gladly I embalm. It brought the pride of those Arabians low, who traversed, in the wake of Hannibal, those Alpine rocks, whence thou, Po, glidest down. Scipio and Pompey triumphed under it when young, and bitter to that hill it seemed, beneath which thou wast born. Then, near the time when willed it was by heaven that all the world should be reduced to its own peaceful state, Caesar assumes it at the hest of Rome. And that which from the Var unto the Rhine it did, the Saône is air and Seine perceived, and every valley whence the Rhone is filled. What next it did, when, issuing from Ravenna, it leaped the Rubicon, was such a flight that neither tongue nor pen could follow it. Towards Spain it wheeled its host around, then turned Durazzo ward, and smote Pharsalia so that to the torrid Nile the pain was felt. And Tandros and the Simois, whence it started, it saw again, and there where Hector lies. Then, ill for Ptolemy, it roused itself. Thence, with the speed of lightning, it swooped down on Juba. Toward your west it next turned back, for there it heard Pompeian trumpets blow. For what it did with its next standard-bearer, Brutus, and Cassius with him, barks in hell. Modena and Perugia too it grieved, sad Cleopatra, who, before it fleeing, took from the asp a dark and sudden death, is weeping still for what with him it did. With him it reached the distant Red Sea's shore, with him it brought the world to such a state of peace that Janus had his temple closed. But what the sign which causes me to speak had done before and after was to do, throughout the mortal world which owns its sway, comes to seem small and dark, if in the hand of its third Caesar it be looked upon with clearly seeing eyes and spirit pure, because the living justice which inspires me granted that sign, when in the latter's hand, the glory of carrying out its wrath's revenge. Now wonder here at what I further tell thee. When this was done, with Titus it ran on to avenge the avenging of the ancient sin. And later, when the tooth of Lombardy the Holy Church had bitten, Charles the Great came to her help by conquering 'neath its wings. Thou now canst judge of those I charged above, and of their sins, which all your woes produced. Against the public standard one sets up the yellow fleur-de-lis, while yet another appropriates it to a party's use. Hence hard it is to see which sinneth most. Let then the Ghibellines their tricks perform under some other sign, for this one he e'er follows ill, who it from justice parts. Nor let this new Charles smite it with his Guelphs, but let him rather fear the taloned claws which from a greater lion once stripped off his hide. Often have sons ere now bewailed their father's guilt. Hence let none think that God will for his lilies change his coat of arms. This little star of ours adorns itself with those good spirits who have active been, that fame and honour might live after them, and when, thus deviating, one's desires tend thitherward, the rays of true love needs must upward mount with less intensity. But in the balancing of our rewards with our deserts, part of our joy consists, because we see them as nor more nor less. Hereby the living justice sweetens so our love in us, that it can never more be turned aside to any kind of wrong. Voices that differ make on earth sweet music. So in this life of ours its different grades produce sweet harmony among these spheres. And in the present pearl there shines the light of Romeo, he whose beautiful and great performance was ungratefully repaid. And yet the Provençals who 'gainst him worked laughed not. He therefore takes an evil path, who to his harm another's good deeds turns. 4 daughters, and each one of them a queen had Raymond Berenger, and, though low-born and alien, Romeo 'twas did this for him. Then slandering words led Raymond to demand a reckoning of this upright man, who 5 and 7 had rendered him for every 10. Thereat, though poor and old, he went his way, and if the world but knew the heart he had, while crust by crust he begged his livelihood, much as it praises, it would praise him more.
End of Paradiso Canto 6.